Hello everyone! Today we will be baking Dutch oven sourdough. So go ahead, collect your ingredients, and follow along with me. This is a list of the equipment you will need. Keep in mind that this recipe takes approximately 12 hours to get through, so make sure you plan accordingly. For this recipe, I'll be making jalapeno cheddar sourdough, but you can choose to use whatever mix-ins you want, if you want any, or you can just make a classic sourdough loaf. Alright, so start by zeroing out your scale. My scale is in grams, so all of the ingredients that I give you will be in grams today. This is my sourdough starter. You can see that it had a lot of little bubbles, indicating that it was definitely ready to go. I took it out of the fridge about like 2 hours before, so that it would be more room temperature for this recipe. The next ingredient that we're adding is high gluten bread flour. In typical stores, I think it'll just be called bread flour, but if you have access to specifically high gluten bread flour or organic bread flour, I definitely recommend those. The next ingredient we'll be adding is organic whole wheat flour. This is King Arthur brand, but once again you can use pretty much any brand. Next we'll add some room temperature water. It's important that the water be room temperature just for rising purposes. If you intend to put your loaf in the refrigerator overnight while it proofs, it doesn't necessarily have to be room temperature, but I find that for proofing purposes and for the purposes of the yeast being able to rise as it would, room temperature water works the best. Next, grab your dough hook and start mixing these ingredients together. You'll notice that I did not add the salt yet. This is because this process is called an Autolyse process, which essentially allows the yeast in your sourdough starter to start consuming the starches in your flour and allows for a quicker activation before the salt is added, because the salt tends to slow down your yeast. You'll notice at the end here, before letting the dough rest, I wet the top of the dough just with my fingertips. This is just so that the dough doesn't form a skin while it rests. I'm covering my dough with a linen towel. However, if you notice that a skin starts to form on your dough at any point during this entire process as you're letting it rest, I recommend using like a plastic bag of some sort. You can do like just a clean Ziploc or something to put over your dough, because that will ensure that it stays fresh and moist and doesn't dry out during the resting processes. After letting it rest for 20 minutes and letting that yeast get used to the starches in the flour, go ahead and add your salt. So you're going to start by mixing on low speed for 2 minutes. And during this time, if it's a dry season, particularly like winter, you might want to add up to like 4 tablespoons of water. And if it's spring and it's a wet season, you can do maybe like 1 or 2 tablespoons. Here I added 2 tablespoons while it was mixing on the low speed. When your dough has reached a consistency that you're happy with, it's not too dry, go ahead and switch your mixer up to high speed and mix on that speed for 3 minutes. You can't see it in the video, but just to the right of the mixer, I have a small bowl of water, and I'm using it to wet my fingertips before touching the dough, just so that my hand doesn't stick to the dough. At the end of your mixing, this is approximately what your dough should look like. I prefer my dough to be able to kind of peel away from the sides of the mixer, but still too sticky to touch with a dry hand. We're gonna let that rest for 30 minutes and then come back and start the series of 3 folds. Alright, it's time for our first fold, and I will be using flour to prevent myself from sticking to the dough. As you can see, it's definitely still sticky to the touch. It's rather dense at this stage. It hasn't had a whole lot of time to rise. And yeah, now we're just going to flour the top of the dough and also sprinkle some flour on our surface. And then I'm using a scraper. You can use a hard scraper, a spatula, your hands if you prefer, just to get that dough ball out of the bowl. And then I'll use my hands, which already have a good amount of flour on them, and I will press the dough out and then fold it in, and then I'll repeat that action 2 times just to really stretch that dough, build up that gluten, and result in a more chewy and structured sourdough loaf. After 2 hours, it's time for the second fold. You'll notice that I'm still using flour on the top of the loaf here and just slightly less flour on my surface, because at this point the dough ball is starting to dry out a little bit. And then, yeah, same as the first fold. Go in with your scraper, get your dough ball out of the bowl, and then flatten it and stretch it out, fold it inward 2 times, and then back in the bowl. For the third fold, you can definitely see that the dough has started to rise a little bit between folds. It's got a little more air each time, and it's also dried out just a little bit more. So this time I'm not going to use any flour on my surface. It's already dry enough that it's definitely not going to stick. And yeah, just go ahead and fold it the way we've been folding it. Stretch it out long, fold it inward, turn it, stretch it out long, fold it inward, and then I prefer to just round it into a little ball shape and then put it seam side down in the bowl, and we'll be back again in a bit. All right, time for the pre-shape. So our dough is definitely more airy now. All those folds have built up our gluten. It's ready to start the final shaping process. Here I chose to add cheddar cheese and jalapenos. I pre-cut the cheddar cheese and I left it out at room temperature with a cover on it for about an hour before I mixed it in, just because I didn't want any cold temperature to lower the temperature of the dough, because I wanted this to proof so that I would be able to bake it before going to bed. If you are choosing to refrigerate your dough overnight and then bake it in the morning, you can go ahead and use whatever temperature mix-ins you would like to use, but I just find that this works better if you're looking to proof it the same day. That said, if there are any other mix-ins you would prefer to add instead of jalapenos and cheddar, you can add whatever you want to your heart's delight. I know some people like chocolate chips and dried cherries. Some people prefer roasted pumpkin seeds and sage. You can do Kalamata olives or rosemary and olive oil. The options are really limitless when it comes to this. And yeah, if you would prefer to make just a plain sourdough loaf, you can do that too. Basically, at this stage, you want to incorporate any mix-ins, and you want to do one more kind of sort of fold and then shape it into a round, because from that round we will be able to do our final shape of our loaf. You'll notice that I am rounding my loaf on this surface as I'm going. This technique is pretty difficult to learn, actually. When I was baking for 9 years, there were a lot of people that I taught this technique to, and it took, about a week of trying every single day to get this technique right. So basically, if you would prefer to do it by hand, you just kind of stretch the outside of the dough underneath the bottom side of the dough until the skin is close to tearing. You don't want that top skin to tear, but you just want it nice and tight so that the gluten is well formed and you'll have a nice chewy sourdough. All right, it's time for the final shaping of our loaf. As you can see, the dough has risen quite a bit between that last pre-shape and now. There's definitely an air pocket under my finger there, which is great to see. And here I'm just gonna take the dough out of the bowl, and then we'll go ahead and start our final shape, which is very similar to the folds. Basically, I'm doing what's called a batard shape, which you stretch it out, you fold both sides in, more in like an elongated shape, and then you fold the 2 top corners in, and you tuck it down, and you just slowly roll it, tucking it in with your thumbs as you go, and then seal it against the countertop. You can replace any mix-ins that fell out, just tuck them in. And then I kind of just like hand shape the loaf. I considered doing a round, but I really wanted my loaf to end up a little bit more elongated. My basket, or my makeshift basket that I'm doing here, is a bowl shape, so I was pretty much guaranteed to end up with a bowl-shaped loaf anyway. But I decided I was gonna try to get an elongated loaf at this point. So basically you're gonna put a linen towel in your bowl, or if you have a basket, that's fine too, and flour it generously. Put your dough in the bowl, seam side up, and proof it for 2 to 3 hours. I proofed my dough for 2 hours at this point, and basically I'm just gonna test the dough proofing by taking my finger and pressing it into the side of the loaf and checking if it springs back right away or not. If it springs back instantly, you need to proof it longer. If it springs back really slowly and eventually gets back to like a normal shape, then it's probably ready for the oven. Next, we're going to turn our finished loaf out onto a piece of parchment paper. Basically, you want to take that top part, which is your seam, and that's going to be against the parchment, because now the top that was floured is actually the top of your loaf. And here you'll see me kind of just like nudging it into a shape that I'm looking for, and then testing the proofing one more time just to be sure. And then I'm gonna go ahead and take just a brush, just a regular clean, this one's a basting brush, and remove any of the excess flour. I don't really like to have big chunks of flour on my loaf, so I was very thorough with it. And yeah, and then just remove the excess flour from the parchment paper, and then we're ready to go in the oven. And now we'll put it in the oven. Basically, I'm gonna take the Dutch oven out, and it's really hot. Keep that in mind when you're touching the lid, etc. Go ahead and take the lid off, and then we're going to score the loaf with a sharp knife. I prefer a serrated knife when I don't have a razor with me. So here you'll see me just using a serrated knife. And because this is going in a Dutch oven and not like a conventional steam oven, I am gonna do a little extra scoring compared to what I would typically do, just because the loaf, or in my experience, baking at home without steam causes a loaf to tear more easily as it expands in its heated state. So here you'll just see me adding some extra scoring to the loaf and allowing for it to expand further than if I had just done one score down the center of the loaf. This is because as the bread is baking, without steam on the outside of your bread, the skin basically will crust up faster, and that means that as your bread is rising, it's more likely to burst that crust, right? So if you have a cut instead, the cut allows for that like moisture and that air to escape from the loaf and basically grows it in the oven as it bakes into a more uniform shape. After 20 minutes, my loaf, I am satisfied with the color. I'm very happy with how it turned out. And yeah, this is the final loaf. It was absolutely delicious. I know I say cool for 1 hour here. That's because you kind of want that steam in your sourdough loaf to stay in there for as long as you can keep it, because it'll keep the inside moist and allow for like that really chewy sourdough flavor to form. You'll see that I did not do that. And I just cut right into it because I couldn't wait to try it. It was very hot, but it was delicious and so worth it. And yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope it was easy to follow along with. And most of all, I hope that you enjoy your loaf of sourdough bread. I know mine was delicious.